Good afternoon. We're past 12 o'clock here in Sweden. It's a clouded day. We're waiting for the sun to turn up. Instead, the sky is greyish, bluish, bleamish, I would say. But it's very, very clement, unseasonably clement. I will go to the summary, and thank you very much for staying on for this rather, have to say, one of the most complicated articles. It defies understanding, but when it comes, it's a blessing. And I will try to go into the bodily thing here, so I will continue with Julian James after I finish the summary of Rosen. And I left off to 65, a bit mid in the summary and conclusions. And I will take the last sentence to make a flowing understanding. The philosophical analysis was next brought into a sharper focus by employing a perceptual model, the Necker cube. Augmented by the topology of the Klein bottle. After examining the implications of all this for addressing the key question of observing the photon, I arrived at the conclusion that the observer would have to adopt a proprioceptive observational posture that would align her ontologically with the observed. Let me acknowledge that while I have considered at length what would be required in principle for quantum perception, I have not fully dealt with the precise method of achieving this. For a more specific account of how we could proceed, we would need to understand better the practical requirements for viewing the world on a microscopic level. We do know from Bushell that adepts or virtuosi of special meditational techniques appear to be potentially capable of radically enhancing the sensory perceptual capacities to the point of directly perceiving light at the scale of single photons. However, this ability has yet to be studied in a systematic way, and its relationship to proprioceptive observation would have to be clarified. But quantum perception is a promising field of research that has excited much interest. Given the insight into quantum reality that could be gained if the difficulties could be resolved, I expect future science will be highly motivated to continue the quest. Before closing, I do want to emphasize my conviction that the science of quantum perception can be achieved only within the context of a new, non-objectivist philosophy and psychology. Previously, I focused on Fox-Keller's dynamic objectivity as exemplified by McGilchrist. But this is hardly the only instance of the burgeoning of science informed by a philosophical approach that challenges the subject-object split. The phenomenological initiative that began early in the 20th century has been carried forward by thinkers like Iain and Klein, who have proposed that the work of science not proceed from stratospheric perception, but from the intricacies of the life world or lived body. Non-objectivist approaches to science have also been advocated by Matsuno, Simeonov, Kaufman, Salamea, and others. In addition, specific applications of Klein bottle philosophy to the natural sciences have been proposed by Rappaport and Rappaport-Perez. Efforts such as these have facilitated the process of creating the philosophical framework that will be necessary for an effective science of quantum perception. And that ends my read-through of Strange Nature of Quantum Perception. Thanks for following. I will compare it to Julian Jaynes as depicted by Iain McGilchrist, and then I will have a prolonged summary discussion. And this is something that caught my eye, so to speak, the connection to our vision and the idea of the object at large. The very perspective from nowhere, that a gaze that has no connection to the gazer, the observer. Julian Jaynes and the origin of consciousness. Putting it at its simplest, where Jaynes interprets the voices of the gods as being due to the disconcerting effects of the opening of a door between the hemispheres, so that the voices could for the first time be heard. I see them as being due to the closing of the door. So that the voices of intuition now appear distant, other, familiar but alien, wise but uncanny, in a word, divine. The point is not that the nature of things is contradictory, but that the attempt to render them in language leads inevitably to what we call paradox. And the attempt to avoid paradox therefore distorts. Language makes the uncommon common. It can never create experience of something we do not know. Only release something in us that is already here. The Logos, the logos can be seen as something shared, reciprocal, perhaps even reciprocally coming into being. Rather than as how we tend to see it, something achieved through private, isolated thought processes. He emphasizes that things change their nature depending on context. Seawater, for example, is life-giving to fish, deadly poison to humans. It is in the drama we find our echo. The very fact of having a philosophy at all was one of the many changes to be brought about by the advent of necessary distance. Drama, at least as conceived by the Greeks, is another, and as Nietzsche saw it, a demonstration of the necessary balance of Apollo and Dionysus. This distance has nothing to do with the ironizing distance or Verfremdungseffekt espoused by modern dramatists. And indeed works to the opposite end. It enables us to feel powerfully with, and thus to know ourselves in, others and others in ourselves. Man must listen to an echo of himself before he wise to deny that all is change and motion. Yet this Parmenides may hear or know himself, as Snell says, and it is in the drama that we find that echo. The mind understanding its own nature. I add here proprioception. The tragedy of Prometheus is a tale of two hemispheres, and in more general terms, the Greek invention or discovery of tragedy. Based as it is on the ever recurrent theme of downfall through hubris. Represents the paradox of self-consciousness, the beginning of the mind coming to know and understand its own nature. I would compare to light or lit. The left hemisphere and money. Money has an important function which it shares with writing. It replaces things with signs or tokens, with representations. The very essence of the activity of the left hemisphere. As Seaford points out, money is homogeneous and hence homogeneizes its objects and its uses, eroding uniqueness. It is impersonal. Unlike talismanic objects, and weakens the needs for bonds. Or for trust based on a knowledge of those with whom one is exchanging. It becomes a universal aim. Corrupting even the death ritual. Threatening other values as it transcends and substitutes for them. And it becomes a universal means. Including to divine goodwill or to political power. It breeds an unlimited greed. The late development of the polis brings about these changes and leads to the development of coinage. Human dignity and choosing destiny. The return to the historic past, the rediscovery of the classical world was not a fact-finding mission. Driven by curiosity or utility. Its importance lay not just in the increase of knowledge in itself, but in the exemplars of wisdom, virtue, and statecraft that it yielded. It was recognized that human dignity lay in our unique capacity to choose our own destiny. Through the models we choose and the ideas towards which we are drawn. Not simply through the blind pursuit of reason wherever it might lead. This involves self-knowledge and the fascination with the unique and different paths taken by different personalities towards their particular goals. Hence, the importance of the recording of individual lives and the rise of both true biography and autobiography. Pause there. So we spoke about distinction versus generalization. This smaller model of subject-object relationship, where the knowing process is not acknowledged or blinded, we can understand that everything becomes monetized without having access to the understanding of the hearing or seeing. We could risk that we abandon understanding of differentiality. As I mentioned before, the objects become dense, shallow. We only see the surfaces, almost as if they were just geometrical objects. And this is the development of distance. It has dual character. It is a blessing because it can lift yourself out of the context and can shed new, more elevated understanding. But if becoming the model for the world, and this is what was pointed to here, with a monetized, generalized, universalized model of the modern world or the modern rationality, we start to think that distance is not a mode of being, but the mode, the only mode. And in the end, we will also lose the understanding that it is a mood. It becomes just presence, what is out there. So monetizing has a dual character. It can be like the Indian god of Shiva, Kali. It can have goodness and helpfulness, but it can turn into Kali, the god of destruction. And what Kali in this case destroys are not the objects, but the sense of talismanic difference, as was so eloquently coined. The very difference, the uniqueness of place, the uniqueness of the moment, and the uniqueness of all properties. Instead, we got a homogeneous space which later turned into the sheer nothingness of the Newtonian conception of space, serving no purpose other than strongly enforce universality, homogeneity, and, like Kali, obliterating the life-giving talismanic difference of the world. This is very close to a book I read 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years, by Paul Feyerabend, where uniqueness is described and how it's starting from antiquity becomes universalized, dehumanized, de-uniqueless. Fragmentation is the true character, but fractality is what reality really is about. And fractality does not have a universal feature. It is not like how we see vision these days, as a simple thing of light and darkness, where there is no struggling in between them. The voice is seen as something flat, not caring. So we need to add properties to the voice to tell what it is, and thereby the talismanic uniqueness of the voice disappears. And that is the dual nature of universalizing. It can serve if it's subservient and not seen as ontic. It can have a very important purpose. Money is fantastic. The Parisian meter is an incredible tool, and so is Newtonian physics. But as a master, as a dominator, as ontology, it becomes monstrous. It becomes the god of Kali, and Kali will turn his back on the life-giving Shiva. Maybe some comments?
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah. Do you see the screen? Okay, good. Not the screen, but
Whiteboard.
You mentioned in the beginning Thomas gave view from nowhere. View from nowhere. So from nowhere. And I would like to mix it with Schrödinger's cat. Let's put a cat there. Let's imagine a cat. Meow. Okay, very poor cat. I'm not a painter. Okay, and here you have the observer. This time the observer will be Newton. And in Newton's world, the observer is very far away. So you could say that for Newton, the view is really from afar. That is the scientist in Newton, the scientist in the Newton's world looks from very afar. Newton can measure, he can take his measuring rod and measure things or look at the cat from distance. And yes, cat is doing well or is not doing well and so on. While in quantum physics, let's say quantum physics, you had observer, let's say Bohr, the distance. So the question is, the observer is, it can be here, where, okay, also in Newton's world, but there is no wall. So you could say that the wall is, they're intermingled. So I could say that the box is really not a box. It's it has openings. Why does it have? Not so much for the cat. Okay, the openings are also for the cat in one way because they are entangled. They are the subject and object at the same. Okay, the cat cannot escape from the box before the observation. So there is no dividing line. And I would like now to compare it with Thomas Nagel's view from nowhere. I have never really understood what did, so Hans, I would like to ask you if you can please explain. So what did Thomas Nagel mean with view from nowhere? So in Newton's, as I said, I feel that the Newton's scientist is looking from very far away, voorhanden, to use Heidegger's term. Bohr or Photon, the modern scientist, should be very close. But how view from nowhere? So how should we? I think it's still Newton's. For a Newton, he looks from very far away, so he's a one day in no place at all. He is nowhere because he should be out of the equation. That is the point. But Thomas Nagel does not want, I hope, that the view should be from nowhere. I hope that he doesn't want.
It's actually, it's a bit more to it than that. The view from nowhere is a bit like I mentioned before. It has dual aspects. It could be an helper. Newtonian physics has served us well. And money, as I got in my wallet, do serve humankind well, and so does the French meter. So there is, so to speak, a view from nowhere. But I said it serves us well, and it does serve us well. But if it becomes the master, the ontology, the decider, it will both stop to be a tool that we can use. It's a bit like a dictator. A person that is a good civil servant might do a fantastic job, but he wouldn't do a great job as a dictator. And the same goes with the view from nowhere. It has become ontologically true. It is the reality only. And the view from somewhere, the unique viewpoint, let's see it in the view of the cat. We all know what the view from nowhere is. That is a cat in a box connected to a radioactive isotope that might give off an electron or a photon or might not. That is definitely from a distance. And I would say even that it is a cat is from a distance. Why? Why would cat be from a distance? What on earth do I mean? I mean that cat is a view from nowhere. It's a monetized version of voice, vision, tactility. A cat is not a cat at first. It will have sounds, it will have a distinct smell, and those things do not derive, as we know now, from the object. It's not first a cat object, and then we perceive its sound, its meow, its visual aspects being red and white, its tactile aspects being furry, all stemming from the generalized, monetized expression of the cat. No, the cat is a direct experience. It is an Heideggerian becoming, a presencing. It is a sein. We can make it into a Ziondas, and what happens? Well, it doesn't follow the Western rule of how Ziondas should behave. It doesn't follow the Newtonian rules for existence. It is out of existence and it's in of existence. This should become clear if we put it in a Heideggerian perspective. Then we don't first have an entity called cat, an ontic entity. We have a direct experience which cannot be put into words. We can call it later, the monetizing can serve a purpose. We can call it later, it was a cat. But that comes later. After, so to speak, the collapse of the superposition. There are no cats out there. And this made it even clearer to me why our doctor friend could not hack it. Because the object cat does not follow the rules of existence in this example. I can, in comparison, take languages like the Yanomamo in the Amazon basin. For them, not even in language a problem would come up. They have not monetized. They would use other methods like meowing, and it wouldn't make sense to say or to perceive meow. I mean definitely perceive, not to say. And then saying there is no meow. That couldn't happen, not even in this thing. The meow is a meow, and it's not like in the voice of the friend. It's not the sign of a cat. It's just a meow. So objects and monetizing is dangerous, but they are not forbidden in Thomas Lago. But they are two moods. There is the universal mood, which should be underneath and following the master, following a true, heartful dictator or benevolent king, the Shiva. But as ontology, as a system of rules and hard things, it becomes venomous, harsh, and hard. Maybe some concluding or
I want only to thank you. We have finally gone through this Rosen paper 2021. 40 pages or 41 pages. It was great. And before that we went through his 2017 paper about quantum gravity that gave us insights on many fields about archetype, and this has helped us also more. So I'm looking forward to our first conversation with Mr. Rosen, Professor Rosen, on Thursday. That will be great. So it's a great start of 2023. Now we are on the last day of January of 2023. So great Guru Hans and Guru Rosen. Great work. Don't be shy.
No, I say thank you very much. It was a very condensed scripture by Rosen. It's eloquently written, and especially the line I read today, where I came to the understanding of how does the seeing work. The seeing as an activity, not as a noun, because we only find the byproducts of the seeing. We do not get into what's really happening. And starting with the objects, the monetized, the universalized, will lead us astray. This was the point made by Paul Feyerabend in The Conquest of Abundance. How the uniqueness disappears from our world and how everything becomes monetized. And that becomes the sterling or the golden standard for what is real. Therein lies the problem. I say thank you very much for your patience and have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye.
Thank you.